The rain hammered against the windshield of Sarah Chen's beat-up Honda Civic as she navigated through the flooded streets of Portland, Oregon on that miserable Tuesday evening in late October. The wipers struggled against the relentless downpour, squeaking rhythmically as they pushed sheets of water aside, only for them to return seconds later. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white from the strain of trying to see through the storm that had been battering the Pacific Northwest for 3 straight days. The radio crackled with weather warnings and traffic updates, but she barely heard them over the drumming of rain on her car's thin roof and the occasional rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city. She was running late for her evening shift at the Cedar Hills Animal Hospital, where she worked as a veterinary technician, a job that barely paid enough to cover her student loans and the rent on her cramped studio apartment in southeast Portland. At 28, Sarah often felt like she was treading water financially, caught between her passion for helping animals and the harsh reality of making ends meet in a city where the cost of living seemed to rise faster than her modest paycheck. Her parents back in Sacramento constantly reminded her that she could have pursued a more lucrative career, but something about working with animals had always called to her, even if it meant choosing ramen noodles over restaurant meals and thrift store finds over designer clothes. As she turned onto Burnside Street, her headlights caught something that made her pump the brakes harder than she intended. There, huddled against the brick wall of an abandoned storefront, sat a soggy cardboard box that was slowly disintegrating in the rain. But what stopped her heart wasn't the box itself, it was the faint movement she could see inside it, barely visible through the storm. Sarah pulled over to the curb, ignoring the honking from the car behind her, and grabbed her phone to turn on its flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and rain, illuminating what she feared she might find: a litter of tiny kittens, probably no more than a few weeks old, huddled together in what remained of their makeshift shelter. Without a second thought, Sarah threw open her car door and rushed into the storm. The cold rain immediately soaked through her scrubs, and her sneakers squelched in the growing puddles as she knelt beside the box. There were 5 of them, she counted quickly, all orange tabby kittens that couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 weeks old. Their eyes were open, but they were shivering violently, their tiny bodies pressed together for warmth in a futile attempt to survive the elements. The cardboard box was nearly dissolved, offering no protection from the rain that had been falling for hours. Sarah's heart sank as she realized how close these babies were to hypothermia, or worse. She gently scooped up the box, feeling the bottom give way slightly under the weight of the wet kittens, and carefully carried it to her car. The kittens mewed weakly, barely audible over the sound of the storm, but the fact that they were making any sound at all gave Sarah a spark of hope. She cranked up the heat in her Honda and used her work towels to create a dry nest in the passenger seat, carefully transferring each kitten from the disintegrating box to the warm, dry towels. Their fur was matted and soaked, and she could feel how thin they were beneath their wet coats. One of them, the smallest of the group, barely lifted its head when she touched it, and Sarah felt a familiar knot of worry form in her stomach. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez, her supervisor at the animal hospital. "Where are you? We've got 3 emergency surgeries lined up, and I need you here now." Sarah stared at the message, then at the 5 tiny lives depending on her in the passenger seat. The responsible thing would be to drop them off at the county shelter and get to work, but she knew what would happen to 5 sick young kittens at an already overcrowded municipal facility. The shelter was good people doing their best with limited resources, but newborn kittens required around-the-clock care that they simply couldn't provide to every animal that came through their doors. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She turned off the car's engine and called Dr. Martinez. "I found a litter of kittens in the storm," she said, her voice barely steady over the connection. "They're hypothermic and probably dehydrated. I know we're slammed tonight, but I can't just leave them." There was a long pause on the other end, filled only by the sound of rain and Sarah's rapidly beating heart. Dr. Martinez had been in veterinary medicine for 25 years, and Sarah knew he understood the impossible choices they faced every day between business necessity and their calling to help animals. "Bring them in," he said finally. "We'll figure it out as we go." Sarah felt tears of relief mix with the rain on her cheeks as she started the car again and carefully drove the remaining few blocks to the hospital. The animal hospital was a modest single-story building, nestled between a coffee roastery and a vintage bookstore, its windows glowing warmly against the dark, rain-soaked street. Sarah had always loved how the place felt like a beacon of hope in the neighborhood, a place where miracles happened daily, through the dedication of people who cared more about their patients than their profit margins. Dr. Martinez met her at the back entrance, his graying hair slightly disheveled and his surgical scrub still damp with antiseptic. Behind him, Sarah could see the controlled chaos of a busy veterinary hospital, exam rooms filled with worried pet owners, the sound of dogs barking from the boarding area, and the distinctive smell of disinfectant mixed with that indefinable scent that seemed to permeate all places where animals were cared for. "Let's get them under the heat lamps," he said, taking the towel-wrapped bundle from Sarah's arms with the practiced gentleness of someone who had handled thousands of fragile lives over his career. The next hour was a blur of medical procedures and careful assessment. Each kitten was examined, their tiny bodies warmed gradually under infrared lamps, while Sarah monitored their breathing and heart rates. The smallest one, which she had started thinking of as tiny, required the most attention. Its body temperature was dangerously low, and it showed signs of severe dehydration that required subcutaneous fluid therapy. Sarah had administered hundreds of injections to animals over her 3 years at the hospital, but her hands still trembled slightly as she inserted the tiny needle under Tiny's loose skin, knowing that this injection could mean the difference between life and death for this fragile creature. Dr. Martinez worked alongside her with the quiet efficiency that had made him one of the most respected veterinarians in Portland. As they stabilized the kittens, he shared stories of other rescue cases they had handled over the years, his voice calm and reassuring even as his hands worked quickly to save lives. "The thing about cases like this," he said while checking the heart rate of the largest kitten, a bold little female who had been the first to start purring once she warmed up, "is that they remind us why we got into this profession in the first place. It's not about the money or the regular hours or any of that practical stuff. It's about moments like this, when you can literally pull a life back from the brink." By 10 o'clock that night, all 5 kittens had been stabilized, fed a specialized kitten formula through tiny syringes, and settled into a warm, clean recovery kennel. Sarah had stayed long past the end of her shift, unable to leave until she was certain they were all out of immediate danger. Dr. Martinez had gone home hours earlier, but not before telling Sarah that she had done exactly the right thing by bringing them in. "Sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be," he had said, patting her shoulder in that fatherly way that always made her feel like she was part of something bigger than just a job. But as Sarah finally locked up the hospital and walked to her car through the still falling rain, the reality of the situation began to sink in. 5 orphaned kittens needed round-the-clock care for the next several weeks, including feeding every 2 to 3 hours, regular medical monitoring, and eventually socialization and placement in permanent homes. The hospital's resources were already stretched thin, and while Dr. Martinez had been supportive, she knew that the business couldn't absorb the cost of caring for 5 non-paying patients indefinitely. Sarah's own finances were precarious enough that she couldn't afford to cover all the expenses herself, despite her desire to do exactly that. As she drove home through the quiet, rain-washed streets, Sarah found herself thinking about her older sister, Lisa, who lived in Seattle and worked in social media marketing for a tech startup. Lisa had always been the practical one in the family, the sister who had chosen a stable career path, and seemed to effortlessly navigate adult responsibilities that Sarah still found overwhelming. They talked every few weeks, usually with Lisa offering gentle advice about Sarah's finances, or dating life or career prospects, conversations that left Sarah feeling both grateful for her sister's concern and slightly defensive about her choices. But Lisa also had over 10,000 followers on Instagram, where she shared carefully curated glimpses of her life in Seattle, her weekend hiking trips, her beautifully arranged meals, and her 2 rescue dogs, Bandit and Scout. Sarah had always been amazed by her sister's ability to build an online community of people who genuinely cared about the content she shared. As she pulled into the narrow driveway of her apartment building, Sarah had an idea that felt both desperate and inspired. What if she could use social media to find help for the kittens? What if the same technology that allowed her sister to share her perfectly plated avocado toast could help save 5 tiny lives? That night, Sarah created an Instagram account called Save the Rain Kittens, using her phone to take photos of the sleeping kittens under their heat lamps at the hospital. She wasn't a natural photographer like Lisa, but the images captured something powerful, the vulnerability of the tiny creatures and the warmth of their safe, clean environment. Sarah wrote their story in simple, honest language, describing how she had found them in the storm and explaining the challenges they faced in the coming weeks. She included information about the estimated costs for their ongoing care, the need for foster families once they were old enough, and her dream of seeing all 5 of them placed in loving, permanent homes. Her first post got 3 likes and 1 comment from her friend Jessica, a fellow vet tech who worked across town. "OMG, Sarah, these babies are so precious. I wish I could help, but my landlord has a strict no pets policy." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sarah shared the account with her small circle of friends and co-workers, asking them to spread the word. She posted photos of each kitten individually, giving them names that reflected their personalities. Brave, the bold female who had been the first to recover; Tiny, the smallest one who had required the most medical intervention; Ginger, a particularly fluffy male with distinctive orange markings; Patches, who had unique white markings on her face; and Storm, the largest male, named for the weather that had brought them all together. Over the next few days, something unexpected began to happen. Sarah's friends started sharing her posts, and their friends shared them too. The account slowly began to gain followers, people who had been touched by the story of the 5 orphaned kittens and wanted to help. Comments started appearing on her photos, sending positive thoughts from California. "These babies are so lucky you found them. How can I donate to help with their care?" Each notification on her phone felt like a small miracle, a reminder that there were good people in the world who cared about the welfare of animals they had never met and might never see. Martinez was initially skeptical about Sarah's social media approach, but he became a convert when the first donation check arrived at the hospital. It was for $50 from a woman in Denver who had seen the kitten's story shared by a friend of a friend on Facebook. "I lost my own cat last month," the accompanying note read, "and seeing these babies get a second chance makes my heart feel a little less broken. Please use this to help with their medical expenses." Sarah read the note aloud to Dr. Martinez, her voice catching slightly on the words, and she saw his eyes soften in the way they always did when he was reminded of the fundamental goodness that existed in people who loved animals. The kittens were thriving under their careful attention. They had graduated from syringe feeding to eating wet food from shallow dishes. Their eyes were bright and alert, and their personalities were beginning to emerge more clearly. Brave had indeed proven herself the boldest of the group, always the first to explore new toys or investigate new sounds. Tiny had defied expectations by becoming one of the most playful, chasing toy mice with determination that belied her small size. Ginger had developed into the cuddler of the group, always seeking out warm laps and gentle pets. Patches was the curious one, investigating every corner of their recovery kennel and showing remarkable intelligence in figuring out how to open latches and escape from enclosures. Storm, true to his name, was the most dramatic, expressing his opinions about everything from the temperature of his food to the timing of his meals with theatrical meows that made everyone in the hospital laugh. As their story continued to spread online, Sarah found herself spending hours each evening managing the Instagram account, responding to comments and messages, and sharing updates about the kitten's progress. She wasn't naturally comfortable with social media attention, preferring the quiet, hands-on work of caring for animals to the public nature of online advocacy. But she was amazed by the response from complete strangers who had been moved by the kitten's story. People shared their own rescue stories in the comments, offered advice about kitten care, and most importantly, continued to contribute funds to help with the ongoing medical expenses. A breakthrough came when Lisa shared the story with her much larger following, adding her own heartfelt caption about her sister's dedication to animal rescue. "My little sister Sarah is one of the most compassionate people I know," Lisa wrote. "She makes barely enough to pay her own bills, but she didn't hesitate to take on the responsibility of saving these 5 lives. If you're looking for a way to make a difference today, please consider supporting her efforts." The post was shared dozens of times within the first few hours, and Sarah watched in amazement as the follower count on Ow Save the Rain Kittens climbed from a few hundred to over 2,000 in a single day. With the increased visibility came new challenges. Sarah received messages from people across the country wanting to adopt the kittens, which was wonderful, but also overwhelming. She had to develop a system for screening potential adopters, working with Dr. Martinez to create an application process that would ensure the kittens went to responsible, loving homes. Some of the messages were heartbreaking in their own way, from elderly people who had lost beloved pets and longed for new companions, from families whose children had been begging for a kitten, from other animal lovers who simply wanted to help by providing good homes. But Sarah also received criticism from some followers who questioned why she was spending so much energy on 5 kittens when there were larger animal welfare issues to address. A few comments stung particularly hard, suggesting that her efforts were misguided when there were so many cats already in shelters waiting for homes. Sarah struggled with these critiques, staying up late wondering if she was doing the right thing or if she should have simply taken the kittens to the municipal shelter and moved on with her life. Dr. Martinez, with his decades of experience dealing with the ethical complexities of veterinary medicine, helped her work through these doubts. "Now, you can't save every animal," he told her during one of their late-night conversations at the hospital. "None of us can, but that doesn't mean the ones you can save don't matter. These 5 kittens are alive today because you chose to stop your car in the rain and pick up a disintegrating cardboard box. That choice rippled out into the world and connected hundreds of people who wanted to help. That has value beyond what you can measure." His words resonated with Sarah in a way that helped her find peace with her decision, even when faced with criticism from others who might have chosen differently. As the kittens approached 8 weeks of age and were ready for adoption, Sarah faced the emotional challenge she had been dreading: letting them go. She had spent nearly 2 months caring for them, watching them grow from fragile, hypothermic babies into healthy, playful young cats. Each had their own personality, their own quirks, their own way of seeking attention and affection. Saying goodbye to them felt like sending her own children out into the world, trusting that the families she had chosen would love and care for them as much as she had. The adoption process had become a community event in itself. The Instagram account now had over 15,000 followers, and Sarah received applications from potential adopters as far away as New York and California. She and Dr. Martinez carefully reviewed each application, conducted video calls with the most promising candidates, and checked references to ensure that each kitten would go to a home where they would be treasured family members rather than impulse acquisitions. The process was time-consuming and emotionally exhausting, but Sarah felt a responsibility to the people who had supported the kitten's recovery to ensure that their donations and hopes were honored with careful placement decisions. Tiny, despite her rough start, was the first to be adopted. A family in Beaverton had lost their elderly cat to kidney disease a few months earlier, and their 10-year-old daughter Emma had been heartbroken ever since. When they saw Tiny's story, Emma immediately declared that this was meant to be their new family member. The adoption meeting was arranged at the hospital, where Emma sat cross-legged on the floor of the exam room, while Tiny immediately crawled into her lap and began purring. "She chose me," Emma whispered to her parents, and Sarah felt her heart both break and soar at the same time. Brave and Storm were adopted together by a young couple who had just bought their first house in southeast Portland and wanted to start their family with 2 kittens who could keep each other company. They had followed the Instagram account from the early days and had been saving money specifically to cover adoption fees and initial veterinary expenses. When they met the kittens, Brave immediately began exploring their carrier, and Storm settled down for a nap, as if they had already decided these humans were acceptable. The couple promised to send regular updates and photos, and they kept their word, later sharing images of the 2 cats ruling their new domain with typical feline confidence. Ginger found his home with an elderly man named Robert, whose wife had passed away the previous year. Robert had been reluctant to get a pet because he worried about his ability to care for an animal at his age, but his daughter had seen the kitten's story and convinced him that a young, healthy cat might bring some joy back into his quiet house. When Ginger immediately claimed Robert's lap during their meeting and began purring loudly while kneading his sweater, Robert's eyes filled with tears. "I think she needs me as much as I need her," he said softly, and Sarah knew that Ginger had found exactly the right home. Patches, the clever escape artist, was adopted by a veterinary student at Oregon State University who had been following the account and was drawn to Patches' intelligence and curiosity. The student, Maria, lived in an apartment near campus and was looking for a companion who could handle the irregular schedule of someone in veterinary school. Patches seemed to immediately understand that Maria was her person, following her around the exam room and showing off her problem-solving skills by figuring out how to open the latches on a cat carrier within minutes of investigation. As Sarah completed the final adoption paperwork and said goodbye to the last of the Rain kittens, she felt a complex mix of emotions that she struggled to articulate. There was sadness at seeing them go, certainly, but also pride in how far they had all come from that terrifying night when she had found them dying in a cardboard box. There was gratitude for the hundreds of people who had contributed money, shared posts, sent encouraging messages, and helped make their recovery possible. And there was a sense of amazement at how a single moment of choosing to stop and help had created ripples that reached far beyond anything she could have imagined. The financial support that had poured in through the Instagram account had not only covered all the medical expenses for the 5 kittens, but had generated enough surplus to help other animals at the hospital. Dr. Martinez used the extra funds to provide care for several other rescue cases that came through their doors in the following months. Animals whose owners couldn't afford treatment or strays that needed medical attention before they could be placed in homes. Sarah's split-second decision to help 5 dying kittens had created an ongoing fund that continued to save lives long after the original patients had gone to their new homes. The experience had also changed Sarah in ways she was still discovering. The confidence she had gained from successfully managing the social media campaign and adoption process carried over into other areas of her life. She found herself speaking up more in staff meetings at the hospital, suggesting improvements to their client communication and animal care procedures. She started volunteering with local animal rescue organizations, using the connections she had made through the Instagram account to help other animals in need find homes and medical care. Perhaps most importantly, the experience had connected Sarah with a community of people who shared her passion for animal welfare. The Instagram account remained active long after the kittens were adopted, evolving into a platform where Sarah shared stories about other animals she encountered in her work and connected followers with local rescue organizations that needed support. She received messages from followers who had been inspired to volunteer at shelters, adopt rescue animals, or pursue careers in veterinary medicine because of the kittens' story. One message that particularly moved Sarah came from a teenager in Ohio who had been struggling with depression and feelings of hopelessness. "Seeing how you saved those kittens and how many people came together to help them made me believe that there's still good in the world," the girl wrote. "I started volunteering at our local animal shelter, and working with the animals there has given me a reason to get up in the morning. Thank you for showing me that one person really can make a difference." Sarah read that message several times, tears streaming down her face, as she realized that the ripples from that rainy October night had reached places she never could have imagined. 6 months after the rescue, Sarah received a group photo sent by all 5 adopting families, showing the former rain kittens grown into healthy, beautiful adult cats, each clearly beloved members of their families. Tiny had grown into a sleek, confident cat who ruled Emma's household with gentle authority. Brave and Storm had indeed become best friends, photographed sleeping curled up together in a sunny window of their Portland home. Ginger had become Robert's constant companion, helping to fill the quiet spaces in his life with purrs and affection. Patches had grown into a gorgeous, long-haired cat who was clearly Maria's study buddy, often photographed sitting on textbooks or helping with homework. The photo was accompanied by a joint message from all the families, thanking Sarah for not only saving the kittens' lives, but for the careful, thoughtful way she had matched each cat with the right home. "These aren't just our pets," the message read. "They're family members who bring joy to our lives every single day. We know that their story has inspired other people to help animals in need, and that makes us proud to be part of something bigger than ourselves." As Sarah looked at that photo, she thought about how different her life might have been if she had driven past that cardboard box on that stormy October night. She might have arrived at work on time, completed her shift without incident, and gone home to her quiet apartment without ever knowing that 5 tiny lives had depended on her choice to stop. Instead, that moment of compassion had opened up a new chapter of her life, connecting her with a community of kindness that extended far beyond Portland, far beyond Oregon, far beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. The experience had taught Sarah that individual actions, however small they might seem, could create waves of change that touched lives in ways that were impossible to predict or measure. In a world that often felt divided and hopeless, the story of 5 orphaned kittens had brought together hundreds of strangers in a common cause, proving that compassion and community could transcend geographic boundaries, economic differences, and all the other barriers that seemed to separate people in their daily lives. Sarah continued working at Cedar Hills Animal Hospital, but with a new sense of purpose and confidence that influenced everything she did. She had learned that her voice mattered, that her choices could make a difference, and that there were always people willing to help when someone took the first step towards solving a problem. The Instagram account, Save the Rain Kittens, became a platform for ongoing animal advocacy, helping to find homes for other rescue animals and raising awareness about the importance of spaying and neutering pets to prevent future litters of unwanted kittens and puppies. The story of the Rain Kittens became something of a local legend in Portland's animal rescue community, shared as an example of how social media could be used to create positive change and mobilize support for animals in need. Sarah was invited to speak at veterinary conferences and animal welfare events, sharing her experience and encouraging others to use whatever tools and platforms they had available to advocate for animals who couldn't speak for themselves. But perhaps the most lasting impact of that rainy October night was the reminder it provided about the fundamental interconnectedness of all living beings and the power of choosing compassion over convenience. Sarah's decision to stop her car and pick up a disintegrating cardboard box had set in motion a chain of events that proved, beyond any doubt, that one person really could make a difference in the world, and that difference could multiply exponentially when shared with others who cared enough to help.